So, what's mindfulness all about? And that's a good question if you're interested in this to begin with, to get a sense of what it is, how it works, what it's about. But actually, I would suggest starting by backing up just a little bit to reflect on, well, why do you care? What is it that you're interested in? And obviously, you know this, you know what's brought you here. But so often with things like mindfulness, actually anything you're going to learn, it's so easy to end up really fixating on the thing itself and to slightly lose sight of what it is you really want. And I would suggest actually really keeping that alive, what you want, to make sure that this is a good fit for you, would be a really good idea. And obviously, I don't know what's brought you here, but for many people, it's some kind of stuckness. You may not use that particular word, but there's something happening that just doesn't feel quite right. Often it falls into three domains. It might be a kind of thinking domain. People, it's so normal that we get stuck in certain patterns of thinking. Often feels quite negative, often quite critical or even self-critical. Usually repetitive patterns of thinking that seem to go round and round and can really be difficult for us. So there's the cognitive domain. There's also the emotional domain, our moods and emotions and feelings. Feelings that we just don't know how to handle, whether it's different flavors of fear or anger or sadness, a sense of shame. There's all these different feelings that we often don't know what to do with, and we can feel quite stuck with those and even overwhelmed by them. And there's also the domain of behavior. We're doing things that we wish we weren't. We often have kind of go-to behaviors that, obviously on some level, they serve a purpose, right? Everything we do serves some purpose, but often things are quite harmful for us as well, and even harmful for other people. And, usually we have a sense of that, don't we? That we think, that's not good. But nonetheless, we find ourselves going back to them again and again and again. And so oftentimes it's some stuckness in one of these three domains. And obviously these three domains of thinking, feeling, and doing are all completely related. So it's a bit artificial to separate them out. But usually there's something in there that brings someone to something like mindfulness, looking for a way out, a sense of relief, the capacity for being a bit freer, not quite so trapped or stuck in any of this. And that is absolutely what mindfulness is about. That's what it's for. It's some sense of flexibility, creativity, freedom, relief from that which we find ourselves stuck in. And then, of course, the question's still hanging there, isn't it? Well, what is mindfulness? And the thing is, there's so many different ways of talking about this. And I find that really the best way of exploring this is in conversation, because we're all so different. We think differently, we feel differently, we make sense of things in different ways. And actually, by having a conversation about it, we can really kind of hone it to ways that make sense for you. But I'd like to offer something here. So I'll go with what I find helpful. And just personally speaking, I find being practical really helpful. So I like to think of mindfulness in terms of skills. I also really like having enough detail so that something's quite juicy and there's quite a lot to it, but not too much so it gets confusing. So personally, I find that having things as collections of three things, so three skills, that gives that enough detail without getting complicated. So if I was going to describe mindfulness in terms of it being three skills, I would say it's the three skills of clarity, calm, and kindness. And so clarity about seeing things clearly. Oftentimes we're kind of aware of what's happening, but we're sort of in it. And so there isn't enough space so we can actually see a bit more clearly, oh, that's what's happening. And that then gives us a bit of wiggle room. So that's part of mindfulness, clarity. But also calm. Oftentimes we're kind of ramped up, revved up, a bit freaked out. And so being able to soothe our nervous systems, calm ourselves, ground ourselves, oftentimes this is where people start with mindfulness, actually, because it's like a little bit of calm then allows you to see things clearly. But, there's no set order with this stuff. So clarity, calm, and then kindness. So often we're kind of defensive, fighting what's happening. And of course, there are times when that's absolutely what we need to do. But very often, being closed down, not being open-hearted, isn't actually that helpful. It cuts us off from things. It limits our capacity to really engage with what's happening. And so kindness is really a kind of open-heartedness and open-mindedness, and also an orientation to want to help, actually, to really be curious what's really going to help in this situation. So that's how I would describe mindfulness, or a way that I find helpful anyway. And of course, there's still loads of questions hanging. Well, how do you do any of that stuff? How do you calm your down? How do you cultivate kindness? And so, there's still more questions to be answered, of course. But that's a beginning, perhaps. And so below, I've written a bit more about different ways of thinking about mindfulness in terms of those 3 skills. And I'd really encourage you, if you have questions, to reach out. If anything doesn't make sense or is a bit annoying, often those sticking points are just a signal that the way that something's being phrased or offered isn't quite right for us. And there are so many different ways of reframing, of rephrasing, of talking about things. And so if you're finding that actually, this isn't quite working, then by all means, send me questions, pop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And it may be that, what I'm offering here, the one-to-one coaching, is right up your street, is what you need. It's going to serve you well, in which case, you can check that out. I've written about that on the coaching page. But it may not be the right thing for you, and that's no problem at all. There's so many different ways of engaging with this stuff. So equally, if you have questions about, this isn't quite right for me, but maybe you want to learn in groups, or maybe you want to do it in different ways, please get in touch. I know a lot of different people who are doing all this stuff, so I'd be happy to share and to point you in the right direction if that's helpful for you. Okay, take care.